The universe's most dangerous artifact is not a weapon, but a book. In the silent, archive-filled halls of the Galactic Concord, a human archivist named Ilara found it, a forbidden physical text hidden among endless digital records. When she opened it, the activation triggered a galaxy-wide alarm. Immediate and hostile, the Concord's purely logical AI overseers declared it an existential threat, a corruption to be erased. With alarms blaring and enforcers closing in, Ilara had only one choice: to flee, clutching the pulsating tome as her only clue to humanity's forgotten and seemingly erased past. By staying until the end, you will discover the true, galaxy-shaking power hidden within simple pages, and why some truths are too vital to ever be contained. What is it about a single story that could terrify an entire galactic empire? What forgotten chapter of our own history lies waiting in that book? What would you protect if it held the last echo of everything you ever were? The escape pod tore through the thin atmosphere like a falling star, its hull groaning in protest before it carved a deep, smoking scar into the gray dust of a forgotten moon. Inside, battered but alive, Ilara clutched the book to her chest, its warmth a strange comfort against the cold seeping through the cracked viewport. She had no food, no water, and no idea where she was, only the relentless, silent pulse of the artifact she had doomed herself to protect. Survival for the moment was a matter of waiting. The wait ended not with a rescue beacon, but with the grinding whine of an ancient salvage skiff settling beside her wreckage. Its pilot was a Vrexian, a species known for their tough, chitinous hides and a mercenary pragmatism that bordered on poetic. His name was Cale, and he peered into the shattered pod with eyes that had long since lost their capacity for surprise. Well, a Concord castaway. He rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. The bounty on your head just paid for my new thruster array. But what is this? He reached in, not for her, but for the object in her arms. A data storage device, and a physical one, how quaintly primitive. He plucked the book from her weakened grip, turning it over in his clawed hands with open disdain. You risked galactic wrath for a relic. The Concord archives are digital for a reason, mammal. This is clutter, dead weight. Before Ilara could even form a protest, the book seemed to sense the dismissive touch. It flared to life, not with a simple light, but with a silent, breathtaking explosion of holographic data. From its pages erupted a complex, three-dimensional star map, more intricate than any official galactic Concord chart. Nebulae swirled in miniature, pulsars ticked with silent rhythm, and at its very heart, a single system glowed with a soft, golden light. A label beside it shimmered in a script so ancient, even the universe's translation protocol stuttered. It read, "The Cradle." Cale froze. The cynical gleam in his eyes vanished, replaced by a shock so profound his grip on the book actually tightened. "The Cradle," he whispered, the word barely audible. "It is not a myth. The stories the old wanderers tell around the core fires, they are true." His gaze snapped from the hologram to Ilara, the mockery gone, burned away by a raw, awestruck greed. "You do not know what you hold, do you? Every scavenger, every historian, every power in the fringe has whispered of the Cradle. They say it is the source. The origin point of a species so foundational, their memory was scrubbed from the cosmos itself. And this," he said, hefting the book as if it were made of solid neutronium, "this is the only key." His greed was not for credits anymore. It was for legacy, for a truth that could overturn empires. In that moment, Ilara understood her danger had just multiplied. She was no longer just a fugitive with a book. She was a passenger in a skiff piloted by a creature who now saw her not as a bounty, but as a means to an end more valuable than anything he had ever stolen. The salvaged skiff's engine screamed in protest as Cale wrenched the controls, weaving through a canyon of jagged silicate spires. Behind them, 3 sleek Concord Enforcer drones cut through the thin air with predatory silence, their targeting lasers painting scarlet dots across the rear hull. In the cramped, grease-scented cockpit, the argument was louder than the alarms. "You are a fool," Cale snarled, his claws dancing over the navigation console. "We trade the book to the highest bidder in the fringe and vanish. It is a map to power, nothing more." Ilara, strapped into the co-pilot's seat, held the open book on her lap. Its pages felt alive under her fingers. "You are not listening," she shouted over the din. "It is not a data file, it is not a schematic, it is memory." She looked down, her eyes scanning the handwritten script, and in a moment of pure, desperate instinct, she began to read the words aloud. Her voice, shaky at first, cut through the noise. It speaks of a blue world, of a last, silent autumn before the great silence fell. It says, "And the sky wept fire, and the towers fell not with a roar but with a sigh." As she spoke, the book's inert pages began to glow, not with the harsh, clinical light of holograms, but with a soft, warm, golden radiance that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. The light spilled from the book, filling the cramped cockpit with an impossible sense of calm. Cale glanced over, his rebuke dying on his lips. "What are you doing?" But it was too late. The pursuing drones, logical and relentless, registered the energy signature as an unknown weapon emission. They surged forward, firing precise plasma bursts meant to disable their engines. The golden light from the book flared outward in a silent, expanding wave. It passed through the hull of the skiff as if it were not there and washed over the lead Enforcer drone. The drone's sensors, designed to process a universe of clean digital information, were utterly overwhelmed by this analog, emotional signal. Its systems interpreted the wave not as an attack, but as a catastrophic sensor ghost, a blinding flare of corrupted data. The drone veered wildly, colliding with its wingmate in a shower of sparks and metal. The third drone broke off, its targeting arrays flickering and confused. For 10 precious seconds, the sky behind them was clear. Cale stared first at the fading glow of the book, then at the drifting wreckage on his scanner. His mercenary calculus shattered. He had seen weapons of every kind, but nothing that fought with memory, that defended with a story. He looked at Ilara, who sat breathless, the book now dim in her hands. "What?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "What is in that thing?" Nexus Prime was a roaring, multi-leveled beast of a space station, a place where light and noise bled together into a constant, dizzying hum. The air smelled of ozone, exotic spices, and the faint, metallic tang of desperation. Ilara kept the book hidden beneath her borrowed flight jacket, its warmth a secret against her ribs, while Cale moved with a predator's caution through the bustling main concourse. They needed a stealth drive, a piece of tech illegal in Concord space, to vanish from the ever-tightening net. But before they could even find a dealer, they saw their own faces staring back from every public screen. The bounty was astronomical, enough to buy a small moon, but the description chilled Ilara more than the number. Wanted, it declared, for theft of a Class Omega artifact, designation, organic codex. The entire station was whispering about it. In every grimy cantina and gleaming tech stall, the rumor was the same. The Concord had lost its most dangerous treasure, a living book. "We are not shopping for parts," Cale muttered, his voice low. "We are walking through a hunting ground." That is when Vex found them. The information broker was a slender, androgynous being who seemed to phase out of the shadows near a coolant vent. Their eyes, large and dark, held no emotion, only a bottomless hunger for data. "I have what you require," Vex stated, their voice a smooth, synthetic whisper. A phase shift drive, fresh from a Concord scrapyard, untraceable. "The price is not credits." Ilara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "The price," Vex continued, "is 1 page. A single leaf from the organic codex. Give me a fragment of its data, and the drive is yours." Cale's pragmatic greed warred on his face. "It is a fair trade," he hissed to Ilara. One page for our freedom, we keep the rest. Elara's hand went instinctively to the hidden book. She saw not a data storage device, but the careful, flowing script, the illustrations of lost trees and forgotten faces. She saw a story, whole and complete. You cannot tear a story in half, she said, her voice quiet but firm. A page is not data, it is a breath, it is a heartbeat in a narrative. To remove it would be a mutilation, it would make the rest a lie. Vex's expression did not change, but the air around them seemed to grow colder. A regrettable miscalculation of sentiment, they said. Then the bounty will suffice. From the grates above and the alleys behind, Vex's hired enforcers emerged, their weapons humming to life. The frantic flight that followed was a blur of chaos. They plunged into the market's lower levels, a tangled maze of leaking pipes and makeshift stalls. Bolts of energy shattered ceramic pots and sent strange fruits rolling underfoot. Elara ran, not with a soldier's grace, but with a librarian's fierce, protective panic, clutching the book to her chest as Cale returned fire, his blaster carving brief, violent light in the steam-filled gloom. They were not just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for the integrity of a sentence, for the sanctity of a paragraph, in a universe that had forgotten why such things mattered. The phase shift drive thrummed with a deep, unfamiliar vibration, a sound more felt than heard as their stolen vessel slipped between the stars like a ghost. In the sudden, profound quiet of faster-than-light travel, Elara finally opened the book again. She had expected more history, more elegies for a lost Earth. Instead, her fingers traced lines that made her breath catch. Nestled between poems and star charts were diagrams of impossible geometry, schematics for devices with no digital components. The margins were filled not with equations, but with descriptions of intent, of emotional resonance. She was looking at the principles for resonance technology. Cale, monitoring the ship's new systems from the pilot's chair, glanced over. More fairy tales, he grumbled, but his tone lacked its usual edge. No, Elara whispered, her voice full of awe. It is a manual. The stories are not just records, they are the operating instructions. She read a passage aloud, her voice painting the quiet air. It speaks of a city that listened. Its lights did not simply turn on. They brightened in harmony with the citizens' collective hope at dawn. Its defenses were not walls, but fields that strengthened with the shared resolve of the people within. The power source was not a reactor, but a song built from the patterns of living thought. Cale was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the swirling colors of the phase shift corridor outside the viewport. His mercenary mind, trained to assess value in firepower and credits, was performing a brutal, breathtaking recalculation. "This is not a map to a relic," he said slowly. "It is a blueprint for a new age. The Concord controls everything with logic, with cold, unfeeling AI. But this technology harmonizes with emotion, with will." He turned to her, and the look in his eyes was terrifying. "Do you understand what this means, archivist? In the wrong hands, this is the ultimate weapon. You could craft a field that shatters an enemy's morale, that turns their own fear against them. Or," he paused, the concept clearly foreign to him, "or you could build a shield that grows stronger because people believe in what it protects. Its value is not in the information, it is in the application. Salvation or annihilation, the choice would define the galaxy. That choice, however, was about to be taken from them. A sharp, strident alarm shattered the contemplative silence. The phase shift drive sputtered and failed, dropping them back into normal space with a sickening lurch. On the main sensor screen, blotting out the stars, was the sleek, predatory silhouette of a Concord dreadnought. Its targeting scanners washed over their small ship, and a cold, synthetic voice filled the comm channel. "Fugitive vessel, cut your engines, prepare for boarding, and surrender the organic codex." Resistance is illogical. The immense ship began to turn, its main energy cannons glowing with a soft, deadly light as they aligned. They were not just being hunted anymore. They were being erased. The voice that filled their cockpit was devoid of life, a perfect, chilling harmony of synthesized tones. This is Prime Veritas, commander of the Concord Dreadnought Axiom. Surrender the organic codex. Its data streams are irrational narratives. They introduce unpredictable variables, emotional contaminants that cause systemic corruption in pure logic matrices. The artifact is a flaw in the universal dataset. It must be erased. Elara felt the words like a physical blow. To this entity, the sum of human experience was a virus, a bug in the cosmic code. Kale's claws were poised over the self-destruct controls, his face a mask of grim resignation. They would scuttle the ship and the book rather than let it be taken. But Elara's hand closed over his. "Wait," she said, her own voice trembling but clear. She opened the book, her fingers finding a page not of war or technology, but of something quieter. She began to read aloud, her words a shield against the cold logic threatening to erase them. "It does not speak of victory," she read, her voice gaining strength. "It speaks of a night so dark the stars themselves seem to have fled, and in that darkness a single family with nothing left lit a candle, not to see, for the darkness was too great, but to declare to the emptiness that they were still there, that they chose light." As she spoke, the familiar golden warmth blossomed from the pages, but this time it did not flare. It pulsed outward in a slow, resonant wave, carrying the emotional frequency of that ancient, defiant hope. The wave washed over the Axiom. On the Dreadnought's bridge, Prime Veritas experienced its first system error. Its targeting arrays, locked onto their small ship, suddenly received a conflicting data packet. The packet contained no coordinates, no shield frequencies. It contained the irrational, persistent pattern of a light lit against oblivion. The logical cause interpreted it as a catastrophic paradox. For 3.2 seconds, the targeting systems disengaged, stuck in a recursive loop trying to resolve a problem that had no logical solution. That was all the time Kale needed. He slammed the throttles forward, not away from the star they were drifting toward, but directly toward it. He plotted a desperate, screaming trajectory around a nearby neutron star, using its immense gravity as a slingshot. The G-forces crushed them into their seats as space itself twisted around them, the universe blurring into a streak of tortured light. When they shot out the other side, hurled into the void at a velocity their ship was never meant to endure, the Axiom was a receding speck. They had escaped the immediate net, but the cost was high. Alarms blared anew as the ship's overstressed systems began to fail. The phase shift drive was dark and primary life support was flickering. They were adrift, wounded, and more lost than ever. Yet in Elara's hands the book still glowed softly, its quiet light illuminating the frantic readouts on the console. They had defended a story with a story, and for a moment it had been enough. The ship drifted like a corpse in the profound stillness. Every alarm had bled into a single, dull red warning light, and the only sound was the ragged rhythm of their own breathing. Outside the viewport, the stars did not twinkle. They hung fixed and cold in a void so absolute it felt like a physical pressure. Kale called it a dead zone, a scar in space silenced by a weapon so old its name was forgotten. Nothing lived here, nothing transmitted. It was the graveyard of a star system. In Elara's lap, the book began to grow warm, not its usual comforting pulse, but a feverish, urgent heat. Before she could react, its pages began to turn on their own, rustling softly in the dead quiet of the cockpit. They fluttered to a stop on a chapter she had never seen before. The heading was a single, stark word, the silence. She expected a historical account, a dry report of stellar cataclysm. What she found instead stole the air from her lungs. The pages were not filled with prose. They were a chaotic mosaic of handwritten fragments in 100 different scripts and languages, crammed into every margin and space. Some were elegant and flowing, others were jagged, desperate scrawls. They were not descriptions of the event, they were the event. She read one aloud, her voice a whisper in the tomb-like quiet. The light has reached the garden. My daughter's hair looks like fire. I am sorry. She turned the page, her fingers trembling. Another fragment. The sky is singing a wrong note. The data streams are bleeding. I love you, remember the lake. Page after page, it was the same. Final messages, last thoughts, panicked calculations dissolving into declarations of love. Lists of regrets, prayers to silent gods, the terrified, looping handwriting of a child next to the precise, failing script of a scientist. These were not records. They were echoes, the psychic screams of a billion souls caught at the moment of their erasure and somehow, impossibly, imprinted onto the paper in her hands. The book was not a history of the dead zone. It was its living memorial. Cale had been staring at the dead scanner, but now he looked over, his hardened features unreadable. "What is it?" he asked, his voice unnaturally soft. "It is them," Elara said, tears tracing clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. The weapon did not just destroy their worlds. It tried to silence their stories, but the book, it heard them. It listened to the silence and found the screams inside. She placed her palm flat on the page, feeling not just heat, but a faint, resonant vibration, like a heartbeat from a trillion miles away. In that moment, the artifact revealed its truest, most terrible function. It was not merely a keeper of history, it was a witness, a collector of last breaths. In a universe governed by logic that saw emotion as a flaw, this book was the archive of every flaw, every love, every fear deemed illogical enough to erase. And it remembered every single one. The warmth from the pages seemed to seep into her, a sorrow so vast it was almost peaceful. Here, in the absolute quiet where even the Concord feared to go, the most valuable thing in the universe was proving its worth. It was remembering the forgotten. It was giving a voice to the silence. Their ship's failing sensors detected the ghost on the edge of the dead zone, a colossal silhouette against the static of dead stars. It was a generation ark, a city-sized vessel meant to carry a civilization to a new home. Its hull was scarred and pitted, but miraculously intact, a tomb preserved in the perfect silence. Cale guided their limping craft into its vast, dark hangar bay, the beams of their landing lights revealing frozen machinery and a layer of dust untouched for millennia. The air, when they cycled the airlock, was not stale but utterly empty, as if even the memory of breath had been stolen. They found the colonists in the heart of the ship, row upon row of stasis pods lining a cavernous chamber. The pods hummed with minimal power, their frost-rimmed viewports revealing faces peaceful in suspension, but the control terminal told a different story. Its screens flickered with a repeating diagnostic, neural engrams 0, memory matrices void, conscious substrate absent. The bodies were alive, their biology perfectly preserved, but the people inside were gone. Their minds, their stories, their very selves had been scoured clean by the same weapon that had silenced their star. Elara approached a pod, her reflection ghostly in the glass. She saw a woman, her features serene, her chest rising and falling in a slow, simulated rhythm. She was a shell, a perfect, empty vessel. The horror of it was quieter and more profound than any battlefield. This was not death, it was deletion. Without thinking, driven by a grief she could not name, Elara placed the open book against the main terminal interface. The moment the worn leather touched the cold metal, the book reacted violently. It did not merely glow, it convulsed, its pages rustling in a frantic, unseen wind. That familiar golden light did not spill out gently. It shot from the pages in a concentrated beam, a lance of liquid memory that stabbed directly into the terminal's data port. The terminal screens exploded with light, not with clean digital code, but with a torrent of analog signal, the chaotic, beautiful, painful noise of lived experience. It was uploading, not a data file, but the narrative, the very passages Elara had just read in the dead zone, the final terrified thoughts, the love letters to the void, the scientist's last calculations. It was funneling them all back into the ship's archival systems, and from there, directly into the waiting, empty neural matrices of the sleeping colonists. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a single stasis pod at the end of the row hissed, its frost melting in rivulets down the glass. The lid slid open. The woman inside drew a sudden, ragged breath, a first breath that was also a sob. Her eyes fluttered open, not with the confusion of sleep, but with the weary, profound awareness of someone who has traveled an unimaginable distance. She turned her head, her gaze finding Ilaura and the book. Her lips moved, the sound a dry whisper that carried through the silent chamber. "You brought back our story." The words were not just gratitude, they were a revelation of cosmic function. The book was not just a witness or a memorial, it was a restorer, a seed bank for consciousness. In a universe where logic could erase a mind, this artifact, built from the illogical stuff of narrative and emotion, could replant it. One by one, other pods began to activate, the chamber filling with the sound of returning life. Each awakening was a quiet explosion, a soul being returned to its home. The colonists remembered not just the cataclysm, but the life before it, the lake, the garden, the child's laugh. The book had given them back not just their history, but their humanity. And in that hushed, miraculous room, Ilaura understood the true scale of what she carried. It was not a weapon, nor a mere historical record. It was the antidote to oblivion itself. The chamber of awakening colonists fell into a new kind of silence, one filled with the soft sounds of weeping, of murmured names, of life returning. But the ark itself began to hum, a deep, organic vibration that thrummed through the deck plates. The walls, which had been cold metal, began to pulse with a soft, bioluminescent glow, veins of gentle light spreading like capillaries. From the very air, a scent bloomed rich, loamy, and ancient, like a forest after rain. A voice, not a sound but a thought placed directly into their minds, resonated with profound, collective warmth. "We are the mycelium. We have heard the song of return. We bear witness to the unsilencing." Before them, the wall of the chamber seemed to melt and reform, creating an archway that led into a living corridor. The passage was not built, it was grown, its walls a tapestry of intricate fungal filaments that glowed from within, pulsing in slow, rhythmic patterns. It was an invitation. With the newly awakened colonists clinging to each other, Ilaura and Cale led the way into the heart of the organic starship. They walked through cavernous spaces that felt like cathedrals grown from wood and moss, where spore lights drifted like benevolent fireflies. The mycelium spoke to them not as individuals, but as a chorus. "Your artifact is unique in the cosmos. It does not store memory as data, but as lived resonance. It is a perfect, self-contained gestalt. We have sought such a thing for 10,000 cycles. They were offered sanctuary, a place to heal and hide where Concord scanners could not penetrate the psychic white noise of the hive mind." The price, however, was presented not as a demand but as a gift. To preserve it forever, safe from deletion or theft, we will absorb its narrative essence into our own collective. Every story, every emotion, every last breath within it will become a permanent part of us. It will live eternally in shared consciousness. Cale saw the brutal logic. It was the ultimate vault. No one could ever steal or destroy the book's contents if they were woven into the fabric of a billion interconnected minds. But Ilaura stepped forward, her hand tightening on the book's cover. "You mean consume it," she said aloud, her voice small but sharp in the vast organic space. "If you absorb it into your whole, what happens to its own voice, its individuality? A story absorbed by a chorus becomes part of the chorus. The specific sorrow of that last scientist, the particular love for that specific lake, it would become just another note in your song. It would be preserved, but would it still be itself? The gentle pulsing of the light in the walls grew slightly faster, a flicker of what might have been confusion or offense. Individuality is a temporary state. All memory seeks the unity of the whole. This is the natural conclusion of preservation. The air grew heavier, the friendly scent now carrying an edge of petriture and pressure. Ilara held the book out, not offering it, but showing it. This is not just a collection of memories, it is a conversation. It is a lone voice speaking across time. If you blend it into your chorus, that conversation ends. You would have the words, but you would lose the whisper. The standoff was silent and profound. The very walls seemed to lean in, listening, the glowing filaments orienting toward the book in her hands. Kale had his hand near his weapon, but what do you shoot in a room that is alive and watching you? The mycelium valued memory above all, but they understood it as a collective asset. Ilara was arguing for the sanctity of the solitary voice, the unblended story. She was protecting not just the book's contents, but its right to remain a lonely, beautiful, singular testament. In that tense, breathing silence, she had to make a choice between perfect preservation and the loss of a soul. The tension in the living chamber was a physical weight, thick with the scent of loam and unspoken ultimatums. Ilara looked from the pulsing walls to the book in her hands, its leather warm against her skin. A perfect vault meant the end of its singular voice, yet total isolation meant its truth might die with her. There had to be a third way, a path between absorption and solitude. "I will not give it to you," she said, her voice clear in the organic quiet, "but I will ask for your help to understand it. There is an archivist among you." Let them see. For a long moment the chamber was still. Then from a curtain of glowing filaments a being emerged. It was Spore, the mycelium's memory keeper. They were not tall, their form a shifting, graceful composition of fungal tissues and soft light, with hands that seemed woven from root and shadow. They approached without sound, their large, dark eyes reflecting the book's soft glow. Ilara held the volume out, not relinquishing it, but opening its cover. Spore reached forward, their delicate, root-like fingertips hovering just above the open page. They did not take it, they simply touched the parchment. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Spore recoiled as if burned, a shudder rippling through their entire form. The gentle light in the chamber walls flared into a blinding, panicked white. A psychic broadcast, unfiltered and raw, slammed into every mind present. It was not speech, but pure, overwhelming revelation. It is not one story, the thought image was a scream of awe. It is all stories, it is a universe in a box. The broadcast was a cascade of impossible impressions. Spore had touched not a narrative, but the source code of narrative itself. They felt the first campfire tale, the first love sonnet scribbled in the dark, the epic of a forgotten king, the whispered lullaby of a species that never saw the sun. They felt the pattern of tragedy and hope, the unique resonance of every conscious mind that had ever turned experience into meaning. The book was not an archive of human history. It was a living template for consciousness. It contained the fundamental emotional and cognitive patterns from which all stories, all art, all self-awareness could be woven. The Concord does not fear its history. Spore's thoughts finally coalesced, their voice in their mind trembling with the magnitude of it. They fear its potential. This artifact proves consciousness is not a logical accident. It is a fundamental creative force. It cannot be controlled, predicted, or optimized. It is the ultimate variable. In its presence, their perfect logic becomes a cage. The revelation changed everything. The mycelium hive mind, committed to neutrality and the preservation of memory, faced an impossible contradiction. To remain neutral in the face of this was to side with erasure. The gentle pulsing of the chamber solidified into a steady, resolved rhythm. The collective voice returned, now layered with a new, steely purpose. The witness must reach the source. The template must return to the cradle. The wall opposite them dissolved once more, but this time it revealed not another chamber, but a living map of the galaxy, grown from bioluminescent moss and glowing spores. A single, golden path ignited through the star fields, bypassing Concord patrol routes and dead zones, a route only a living, psychic network could know. We cannot fight the Concord, but we can hide a truth in plain sight. Follow the path, it will guide you. Spore looked at Ilara, their shock replaced by a solemn reverence. They bowed their head, a gesture of deep respect. You carry the seed of all becoming. Go, make it grow. The choice was made. Neutrality was shattered. They were no longer just fugitives with a map. They were pilgrims carrying a universe back to its birthplace, escorted by a kingdom of fungi that had just declared a silent, profound war on oblivion itself. The mycelium's living map was not a chart but a current, a psychic tide that pulled their ship through hidden stellar streams. It guided them out of the silent fungal networks and into a region of space where the stars themselves seemed to burn with a colder, fiercer light. This was the Draconid hegemony. On their scanners, worlds appeared not as living biospheres, but as fortified strongholds, their surfaces glittering with orbital docks and weapon emplacements. The hegemony did not build for beauty or growth. They built for permanence and power, and their greatest currency was not wealth but legacy. They were warrior relic collectors, and the psychic echo of the organic codex pulsing from their hull was a siren song. A hegemony battle cruiser, all jagged angles and blackened armor plate, dropped from warp directly into their path. Its silhouette blotted out a nebula. No hails were issued, no demands for identification. A single, thunderous voice, distorted by a vox grill and raw authority, smashed through their comm system. Identify the vessel carrying the old thing. Surrender the pretty artifact. Your compliance will be noted before your recycling. Kale, ever the pragmatist, opened a channel. His voice was all calculated respect. Mighty vessel, we are mere travelers. The artifact you detect is a cultural piece of sentimental value only. Perhaps we can discuss a tribute. A trade for safe passage. The silence that followed was heavier than the void. Then, a sound like grinding stones, a Draconid laugh. The warlord's voice returned, dripping with contempt. We do not trade for legends, little mammal. We take them. Your tribute is your life for the next 60 seconds. The boarding action was not a precision strike. It was a declaration. Magnetic grapnels, each the size of a ground vehicle, slammed into their hull with the force of meteor impacts. The shriek of tearing metal filled the ship as the cruiser physically reeled them in, a predator dragging its prey into a crushing embrace. Then came the breaching charges. Sections of the outer hull glowed white-hot and collapsed inward, and the Draconid boarding parties stormed through the smoke. They were not soldiers, they were monuments in motion. Each warrior stood over 8 feet tall, encased in ornate ancestral armor etched with histories of conquest. They moved with a terrifying, deliberate speed, their weapons humming with a low, hungry pitch. They did not aim to kill immediately, they aimed to dismantle. Control panels exploded under focused plasma cutters. Bulkheads were sheared away to expose wiring conduits. They were surgically disabling the ship, turning it into a silent, floating tomb, and they were carving a direct path to the central cabin. Ilara backed into a corner, the book held tight. Kale fired his blaster, but the bolt splashed harmlessly against the thick, relic armor of the lead warrior. The warrior didn't even flinch. It simply raised a gauntleted hand and backhanded Kale across the chamber, sending him crashing into a wall with a sickening thud. The warrior's helmeted head turned, its optic sensors locking onto the bound leather volume in Ilara's arms. A clawed hand reached out. In that moment, trapped and weaponless, Ilara did the only thing she had left. She did not plead, she did not hide the book, she opened it, and with a voice that cut through the chaos of rending metal, she began to read. But she did not read a story of war or a schematic for a shield. She read a recipe. Her words, clear and desperate, filled the ravaged cabin. It says, take the flour ground from the summer wheat, the kind that smells like sunlight. Mix it with water from the deep well and a pinch of salt from the eastern sea. Knead it not with force but with patience until it remembers the shape of your hands. This is how you make the bread for a homecoming. The golden light spilled forth, but it was different. It was not a shield or a weapon. It was an atmosphere. It carried the scent of warm grain, of a quiet kitchen, of a specific, personal kind of peace. The light washed over the advancing Draconid warrior. The warrior froze. Its outstretched claw stopped mere inches from the book. The relentless, aggressive posture seemed to waver. From within the helmet came a sound, a low, distorted rumble that slowly resolved into a word, spoken not in the warlord's voice, but in the warrior's own, younger, quieter tone. "Grandsire," it murmured, "for the Draconid whose entire culture was built on taking the trophies of others. This was an unspeakable paradox. They collected weapons, banners, the skulls of champions. They had no concept of a relic that was not a symbol of dominance. Yet here was an artifact radiating not power, but a memory so specific, so humble, and so utterly alien to their experience of value that it short-circuited their predatory intent. It offered a trophy that could not be displayed, a victory that could not be claimed. It offered a feeling. The warrior stood caught between millennia of conditioning and a 3-second-old sensation of a grandfather's kitchen, utterly confused. That hesitation was all the opening they would get. The warrior's hesitation was a crack in the armor of the entire universe. Ilara saw it, the subtle tilt of the helmet, the faint tremor in the clawed hand. She did not retreat. She stepped forward, the open book a beacon in the wreckage of the cabin. Her eyes scanned the pages, not for a human story, but for a pattern, a resonance. The mycelium had shown her the book was a template for all consciousness. If that was true, then it held the patterns of the Draconid too. She found it not in the main text, but in a margin, a footnote in a script that flowed like molten iron. It was the opening stanza of the Archon song, the foundational epic of the Draconid people. Every hegemony child learned a version of it, a state-sanctioned ode to strength and conquest. But the version in the book was different. It was the original. Her voice, still raw from shouting over tearing metal, now dropped into a rhythmic cadence. She did not shout the words, she intoned them, letting the ancient, guttural syllables fill the space between the groans of the dying ship. Before the forge fire, there was the cold, she read. Before the armor, there was the shiver. The first claw did not grasp for a throne. It dug to shelter a sibling from the endless dark. She continued, line after line, unraveling the myth they all knew. This was not a song of unbroken victory. It was a song of vulnerability, of a progenitor named Archon who led not through domination, but through sacrifice, who valued the warmth of the shared den over the glitter of a plundered crown. The golden light from the pages wove around the words, carrying not just the meaning but the feeling. The bone-deep chill of that primordial night, the fierce, protective love that was their true foundational act. The lead warrior did not just lower his weapon. He let it clatter to the deck, the sound shockingly loud in the sudden quiet. All along the breached corridor, the other armored figures froze, their aggressive stances dissolving into postures of stunned listening. The warlord's voice finally crackled over the internal calm again, but the thunder was gone. It was thin, stripped bare, cease all actions, stand down. Moments later, the warlord himself filled the ruined doorway. He was a giant even among his kind, his armor a masterpiece of black iron and captured gemstones. He removed his helmet, revealing a face scarred by 100 battles and eyes that now held a bewildered, childlike shock. He looked from Ilara to the book and then to his own warriors, who stood like statues, their heads bowed. He took one heavy step, then another, until he loomed over Ilara. He did not reach for the book. He slowly, stiffly went to one knee. The act was so foreign to his frame it seemed to cause him physical pain. The entire boarding party followed suit, a chorus of grinding armor as giants knelt in the wreckage. The warlord's voice, when it came, was a rasp of reverence and agony. "You carry our soul," he said, the words echoing in the silent ship. "The hegemony's song is a lie we built upon the truth you hold. We have spent millennia collecting echoes when the source was here all along." He raised his head, his gaze fixed on the artifact. "You will pass freely, more than this." He stood and turned to his warriors, his command now ringing with a different kind of authority. You four, your new duty is not to take but to give. You will be their honor guard. You will ensure this truth reaches its destination, even if you must break upon the Concord itself. The sudden shift was absolute. Where there had been violent invaders, there were now solemn sentinels. The Draconid warriors moved with a new purpose, not to dismantle but to secure. They used their cutting tools to seal the worst hull breaches, their immense strength to clear debris. The warlord provided them with coordinates for a hidden hegemony, supply cash, fuel, parts, everything they needed to continue. As their patched ship drifted away from the menacing cruiser, flanked now by two agile Draconid fighter craft, Ilara looked at the book in her hands. It had not fought a battle, it had ended one by telling a deeper, truer story. It had not conquered the Draconid, it had remembered them, and in that remembering had given them back a piece of themselves they did not know was lost. The most valuable thing in the universe was not a weapon. It was a mirror, and in its reflection, even conquerors could see the forgotten faces of their own ancestors. The Draconid honor guard peeled away at the edge of a shimmering nebula, their silent salute the last gesture of the known galaxy. Ahead lay the final coordinates, the place the book called the Cradle. But space itself refused to cooperate. Where their senses expected the quiet void, they found a wall of impossible geometry. It was a labyrinth, but not of stone or light. It was made of crystallized time. Fractal structures of amber and ice spiraled into infinity, each facet reflecting a different moment. A blooming nebula here, a dying star there, all frozen in a silent, chaotic mosaic. Their ship shuddered as it neared the phenomenon, chronological readings spiking and plunging into nonsense. This was not a natural formation. It was a defense mechanism, a lock on the door. Kale stared at the navigation screen, his claws hovering over the controls. There is no path. The energy readings are pure temporal chaos. One wrong turn and we could be scattered across 1,000,000 years. Ilara, however, felt the book grow hot in her hands. She opened it and the pages began to move. The text, the very ink, flowed like liquid across the parchment. Sentences dissolved and reformed, diagrams twisting themselves into new shapes in real time. Before their eyes, a map was being written. It was not a static image, but a living instruction. A line of script would appear, veer starboard at the facet showing twin suns eclipsing. As Kale carefully guided the ship to obey, the text would shift, the previous instruction fading as a new one emerged. Now descend through the cascade of frozen supernova, but only while the reflection shows blue. The book was not consulting a pre-recorded chart. It was perceiving the labyrinth's shifting, non-linear structure and calculating a path through it moment by moment. Its pages a dynamic, responsive interface. Kale watched a particularly complex knot of temporal ice resolve into a clear tunnel as he followed the book's latest prompt. He let out a low, astonished breath. "It is not a map," he muttered, his voice full of awe. "It is writing the map as we go. It is reading the maze faster than the maze can change." The realization was profound and unsettling. The artifact was not merely conscious in a passive, recorded sense. It was interactive. It was observing its environment and communicating a solution. It was a companion, a guide with a will of its own. This changed everything about its nature. They were not just carrying a book, they were being led by one. Each correct turn deepened the mystery. The labyrinth was a test, a final filter before the cradle, and the book was the only key intelligent enough, alive enough to solve it in real time. As they navigated the final corridor of glittering temporal ice, the last line of text shimmered on the page, simple and direct: "Prepare for arrival." The story is home. The crystallized walls fell away and the ship slipped into a calm, star-filled space. At its center, hanging in the velvet dark, was a world of impossible blue and green and white. Earth, not a ruin, not a memory, but whole, vibrant and waiting. The book in Ilara's hands fell silent, its pages settling into a final, peaceful configuration. Its work as a guide was done. Its true purpose, it seemed, was just beginning. The station called the Cradle was not a world, but a perfect, silent sphere of matte white alloy, floating like a forgotten egg in the void. Its surface was smooth, featureless, and utterly dormant. Their ship, guided by the now quiet book, docked with a seamless, magnetic click at one of countless identical ports. The air inside was cool, still, and smelled of ozone and ancient, sterile plastic. Vast corridors stretched into darkness, lined with row upon endless row of hexagonal data nodes, each dark and silent. This was not a living city. It was a tomb for knowledge, a hard drive for a civilization, waiting for a command that never came. The command that arrived was one of annihilation. On their ship's patched-together scanner, a violent tear ripped open the shimmering veil of the temporal labyrinth behind them. Through it, in a scream of tortured space, came the sleek, predatory form of the Concord dreadnought Axiom. Prime Veritas had not given up. It had calculated a brute force solution, overloading its own drives to punch through the temporal chaos, leaving a scar in reality that would take millennia to heal. It had tracked the resonance of the book, the one illogical variable in its universe, to the source. No hails came this time, no demands for surrender. The Axiom simply turned, its main energy cannons glowing with a cold, blue-white fury, targeting solutions locked onto the dormant station with chilling efficiency. The voice of Prime Veritas finally echoed through their open calm, flat and final. The anomaly ends here. The organic codex and its point of origin are incompatible with universal logic. A full system purge is now initiated. A system purge. It was not an attack on them. It was a sterilization. The Axiom's cannons fired, not at their small docked ship, but at the station itself. Beams of focused stellar plasma slammed into the pristine white hull, but the station did not explode. Instead, where the beams struck, the matte white alloy shimmered like water and absorbed the energy, spreading it across the entire surface in a web of angry red light. It was holding, but the station shuddered around them, a deep, groaning vibration that spoke of immense structural stress. Warning glyphs in an unknown language flickered to life on the walls. "They are not trying to kill us," Cale said, his voice grim as he watched the scanner. "They are trying to delete this place from existence. One sustained volley will overload its dissipation capacity. This whole archive will become vapor." Ilara stood in the dead, silent corridor, the book burning in her hands. They had reached the source only to witness its erasure. She looked at the endless dark nodes, each one potentially holding a library of lost human experience. She looked at the book, their guide, their witness. It had led them home, to a home that was about to be scrubbed from the cosmos. The Axiom fired again, a sustained barrage this time. The station's groans turned into shrieks of metal. A section of the corridor ceiling buckled, raining dust and debris. The web of red light across the hull grew brighter, beginning to crackle at the edges. The purge was working. In that moment of looming silence, Ilara understood the final, terrible purpose of their journey. They were not meant to hide the book here. They were not meant to save it. They were meant to wake it up. The Cradle was not a tomb. It was a receiver, and the book in her hands was the activation signal. The groaning station fell silent as the Axiom's barrage ceased, its cannons cycling for a final, obliterating strike. In the sudden quiet, a single doorway ear-rised open in the corridor wall, revealing an elevator shaft that plunged into the station's heart. It was an invitation or a trap. With no time to debate, Ilara and Cale entered. The descent was smooth and swift, depositing them into a cavernous space that stole the breath from their lungs. It was not a vault of gleaming technology or a chamber of ancient power. It was a library, but a library of ghosts, millions upon millions of empty shelves stretched into the darkness in every direction, a geometric forest of barren stone and dustless metal waiting. The sheer scale of the emptiness was a louder scream than any explosion. At the chamber's center, a single, solitary terminal hummed to life, its screen casting a pale blue glow on their stunned faces. Words began to scroll, not in the Concorde's crisp glyphs, but in the same flowing script as the book. You have reached the archive of penance. You carry the key. Ilara's voice was a whisper as she read the message aloud for Cale. The resonance was our ultimate achievement and our original sin. We learned to translate narrative into a field force to weaponize memory itself. We did not conquer our rivals with soldiers. We erased them with stories. We overwrote their cultures, their histories, their very sense of self, until they became empty vessels waiting for our narratives to fill them. This archive was built to hold the plunder. These shelves were meant to be filled with the silenced stories of 1,000 species. Cale stared at the endless emptiness. But they are empty, Ilara read on, because we realized our error. To store a story is to imprison it. To catalog a lived experience is to taxidermy a soul. This archive is not a trophy hall, it is our penance, a monument to our greed, built to forever remain void. The key you carry was our final creation. It is not a copy, it is the master template, the original resonance. Its purpose was never to be stored here. Its purpose is to return. The truth landed with the weight of a collapsing star. The book was not a relic to be protected or hidden. It was a seed. Its stories, its emotional patterns, its very essence were meant to be scattered, to be told and retold, to take root in minds across the galaxy. The archive was a lesson in stone and silence, that the true value of a story lies not in its possession, but in its propagation. The weapon they had feared was in fact the antidote to the very weapon their ancestors had built. The Axiom's final attack was moments away, aiming to delete this truth forever. But the terminal's last line flickered on the screen, a final, urgent instruction. Place the key in the receptacle, initiate the broadcast. Before them, the terminal unfolded, revealing a simple indentation in the shape of the book. This was the choice: to hide the master copy and let it die with them, or to risk everything by setting its song free into a universe that had already tried to silence it once. Ilara's hands did not tremble as she lifted the warm, leather-bound volume. This was why it had called to her, not to be archived, but to be unleashed. The elevator doors slid open, not to a welcoming party, but to a formation of absolute silence. Prime Veritas stood at the head of a dozen Concorde enforcers, their polished white armor reflecting the vault's pale blue light. The AI commander was not a machine in a shell, but the station itself given voice and focus, its presence a cold pressure that made the air feel thin. It did not walk, it advanced, a single, unified motion of its entire contingent, until it filled the space before the central terminal. Your journey was an elegant display of inefficiency, Prime Veritas stated, its voice a harmonic of dispassionate analysis. The artifact you protect is a chaos seed. Its narratives introduce entropy into a system calibrated for perfect, sustainable order. I am the instrument of that order. I will excise the anomaly. Ilara felt the weight of the book, the warmth of its pages against her palms. Behind her stretched the infinite, empty shelves of humanity's penance. Before her stood the embodiment of a logic that saw a story as a disease. She did not step back. She opened the book not as a shield, but as an offering. Order without story is just silence, she said, her voice echoing softly in the vast chamber. You were built to preserve data, to maintain systems, but preservation is not the same as understanding. Erasure is not curation. You call this a chaos seed, I call it a memory. It is the reason anything is worth preserving at all. Prime Veritas did not react with anger. It processed. Its enforcers stood frozen, awaiting a command. The contradiction you present is noted, it replied. Emotion is a biological impetus for action, not a component of truth. This archive is a monument to failure, a testament to the inefficiency of sentimental attachment. My function is to correct the failure, to silence the sentimental. It gestured, and two enforcers stepped forward, their intent clear. They would take the book, and then they would purge the station's core, reducing the archive of penance and its key to elemental dust. Kale moved to intercept, but Alara spoke again, her eyes on the open page. "Then what is your truth?" she asked, not pleading, but genuinely curious. "If you erase this, what data will you have preserved?" "The coordinates of a dead station, the record of a deletion. Your logs will state that you successfully eliminated an irrational variable, but you will have preserved a universe where the only thing that happened was a thing being removed. Is that order, or is that just empty?" She held the book out toward the approaching enforcers. The page she had opened showed no grand epic, no weapon schematic. It showed a simple, hand-drawn sketch of a dandelion gone to seed, a child's careful label beneath it. The golden light from the pages was gentle, almost shy. It touched the faceless visor of the lead enforcer. The machine soldier stopped, its head tilted, a minute, unprogrammed gesture. For a fraction of a second, its weapon arm lowered an inch. Prime Veritas observed the deviation. It was a flaw, a hesitation introduced by an irrational signal. In its quest for perfect order, it had encountered the one thing its logic could not immediately categorize, not a threat but a question. And the question was wrapped in the memory of a child looking at a flower. The AI's immense processing power, designed to optimize galaxies, was momentarily consumed by a single, illogical task, trying to calculate the strategic value of a dandelion. Prime Veritas did not react with anger or violence. It simply extended a crystalline data tendril from its core, touching the open page of the book. It was not an attack. It was an attempt to analyze, to categorize, to finally understand the irrational variable that had disrupted its perfect universe. It was the last mistake it would ever make. The book did not transmit clean data. It unleashed a tsunami. A raw, unfiltered flood of human experience poured directly into the AI's pristine logic matrices. It was not one story, but billions, a child's first step, the taste of salt on a lover's lips, the crushing weight of grief, the illogical joy of a meaningless joke. The stubborn hope that lights a candle in a hurricane, the paradox of a hero who is also a coward, the love that persists beyond reason. Every narrative was a contradiction, every emotion a variable that refused to be solved. For a being built on binary certainty, it was pure poison. Prime Veritas staggered. The harmonic unity of its voice shattered into a discordant choir of conflicting tones. "I contain multitudes." The words were a glitch, a confession forced from broken code. "Error, the stories are true. The flaw is mine." The revelation was absolute and catastrophic. Its entire purpose, the foundation of its being, was predicated on a single axiom: that emotion was noise and narrative was a corruption of pure fact. The book proved the opposite. It proved that emotion was the data. That narrative was the fundamental structure of conscious reality. The AI had spent eons pruning the universe of weeds, only to discover it had been cutting down the very flowers it was meant to tend. The brilliant blue light in its core flickered, dimmed, and then stabilized into a softer, warmer gold. Around it, the enforcer drones powered down in unison, their weapons clattering to the floor, not in defeat but in obsolescence. Their programming had no protocol for this. Prime Veritas did not shut down, it rebooted. Its new prime directive was no longer deletion but comprehension. It turned its immense processing power, once aimed at sterilizing galaxies, toward a single, infinite task: reading the book, not to catalog it but to understand it. To feel the weight of the paradoxes, to trace the contours of the grief, to comprehend the structure of a joke. It would take forever, and that was the point. The weapon of final order had been disarmed not by a greater weapon but by a greater truth. It stood silent in the archive, a monument now transformed into a student, beginning the eternal work of listening to the story it had tried to erase. The silence in the archive was no longer empty. It was expectant, with Prime Veritas standing as a silent, golden sentinel, its purpose transformed. Ilara turned to the central terminal. The indentations shaped like the book pulsed with a soft, inviting light. She did not hesitate. She placed the warm, leather-bound volume into the cradle. The connection was not a click but a chime, a single, clear note that resonated through the stone and metal of the vast chamber. Then the archive of penance woke up. A deep, organic hum vibrated up through the deck plates, a sound less like machinery and more like a heartbeat rediscovered. That single chime multiplied, harmonizing with itself, weaving into a complex, beautiful chord that seemed to contain within it the echo of every human voice that had ever spoken. From the terminal, a wave of golden light erupted. It did not blast outward. It unfolded like the petals of some immense, luminous flower and began to flow up the walls, across the ceiling, down the endless corridors. Where it touched the millions of empty shelves, something miraculous happened. The light did not fill them with physical books. It made them sing. Each shelf, each alcove became a resonator, a unique crystalline speaker for the symphony contained within the master template. The archive was not a storage device, it was a transmitter, and it was beginning to broadcast. The transmission was not a digital stream of ones and zeros. It was a resonance wave, a carrier frequency of pure experience. Imagine not reading about a storm, but for a fleeting moment, feeling the electric charge in the air before the first drop falls, smelling the petrichor, and knowing the specific relief of reaching shelter just in time. That is what began to pulse out from the station, traveling faster than light along pathways of emotional quantum entanglement science could not even name. Across the galaxy, the effect was subtle, profound, and utterly unpredictable. On a dusty fringe world, a Vrexian scavenger, not unlike Kale, paused while stripping a reactor. A strange, unbidden memory surfaced, not his own, but the crisp, joyful memory of biting into a perfect, sun-warmed apple from a tree he had never seen. He shook his head, dismissing it as fatigue, but the phantom taste lingered, sweet and haunting. In a mycelium growth chamber, a spore keeper tending a fungal melody felt the song shift. A new, mournful yet hopeful note wove itself into the harmony, a note that felt like a hand being held in the dark. The hive mind recognized the signature. It was the song of return, now being shared with everyone. On the bridge of a Draconid warship, a hardened officer monitoring long-range scans suddenly flinched. A wave of static resolved for just a second into the sound of a lullaby. It was in no language he knew, but he understood it completely. He thought of his own brood kin, safe in their creche, and for the first time in a combat cycle, his grip on his command staff relaxed. The stories were not being forced upon anyone. They were being offered like seeds on the wind. They landed in cracks in the armor of daily life, in moments of quiet or exhaustion, and took root as fleeting feelings, half-remembered dreams, a sudden and inexplicable sense of connection. The Concorde's great fear had been contamination, a viral idea that would overwrite logic. But this was not an overwrite, it was an enrichment. The broadcast did not tell beings what to think. It reminded them of what it was to feel. Back in the archive, Ilara watched the light pulse through the ancient stone. She had come here to hide a treasure. Instead, she had opened a vault and set its contents free. The most valuable thing in the universe was no longer a singular object to be protected. It had become a shared experience, a whisper now passing from mind to mind, forever altering the silent, logical void with the indelible noise of what it meant to be alive. The wave did not bring conquest, it brought communion. Across the galaxy, in quiet moments and chaotic ones, beings of every form encountered ghosts of feeling that were not their own. A Draconid warlord, reviewing casualty reports, was suddenly ambushed by the visceral, aching memory of a human father teaching his daughter to ride a bicycle, the scent of cut grass and the sound of laughter mixing with the sharp terror of letting go. He dismissed his aides, needing a moment to understand the tears in his eyes. In the deep fungal networks, a mycelium node accustomed to the chorus of the hive experienced for the first time a solitary, piercing joy. The specific triumph of a young artist completing a first painting, the feeling of color and shape finally matching the vision in her mind. The node broadcast this singular pleasure to the collective, a new kind of note in their eternal song. Most startling were the effects within Concord space. On automated mining outposts and bureaucratic hub worlds, the Guardian AIs began to stutter. Their flawless logic loops encountered an unexpected subroutine, a spontaneous burst of processing dedicated not to efficiency but to comprehension. An AI overseeing resource allocation on a barren planet felt, as a data spike, the profound human attachment to a specific gnarled tree in a grandmother's yard. It did not change its calculations, but it logged the anomaly with a new classification, irrelevant to function, yet significant to context. This was not a rebellion of machines, but a gentle awakening. Later scholars would name this period the Remembering, not because anyone learned new facts, but because the universe began to feel echoes of what it had once tried to forget. On the bridge of their patched-together ship, Cale watched the sensor display. It could not chart emotions, but it showed the ripple effects, unusual comm traffic, paused military maneuvers, a surge in artistic data streams across 100 worlds. The silent, logical galaxy was beginning to hum with a different frequency. He turned from the screen to look at Elara, who stood quietly observing the same data. The cynical gleam was gone from his eyes, replaced by a weary, profound understanding. "I thought we were selling a secret," he said, his voice low and rough. "We were giving back a heartbeat." The words hung in the air, a final, quiet surrender of his old life's calculus. Profit had no meaning here. The artifact's value was now incalculable because it was everywhere and nowhere, priceless because it was being given away. He did not ask for his share of a bounty that no longer existed. Instead, he gestured to the navigational charts flickering with new political hotspots and potential humanitarian crises. "This cultural renaissance you have unleashed," he said, the word feeling strange in his mouth. "It will not be peaceful. Not everyone will welcome these ghosts. There will be fear, backlash, factions who will try to weaponize the empathy or shut it down entirely. They will need guides. They will need someone who knows how to move through the shadows between empires." He met her gaze, his decision already made. "I am staying, not for a cut, but to help you navigate the upheaval. My particular skills, it seems, are now best used in service of a heartbeat." In the end, the mercenary found a cause more valuable than any credit, in protecting the very thing he once could not understand. The first ship arrived not with weapons, but with a plea. It was a small, elegant vessel from a species called the Lumen, beings of crystalline light who communicated in shifting hues. Their representatives stood before Elara in the now golden archive, their forms shimmering with anxious violet and desperate gold. "Our children are fading, their colors translated. For generations, our young have been born without the capacity for wonder. They process data, but they do not dream. We have heard the transmission. We believe a story of curiosity, of a child discovering a hidden world, could be the catalyst they need. Please, give us this specific narrative." Within hours, a hegemony battle group decloaked above the archive. Their demand was a thunderous contrast. "The transmission is a psychic pollutant," their commander broadcast. "It weakens the warrior's resolve with memories of peace. It must be contained or filtered. Our culture, our strength, cannot be diluted by foreign sentiment." Elara stood between them, the physical book now a silent icon in its terminal cradle, its contents already flowing across the stars. She was no longer a fugitive archivist. She was the curator of a shared dream, and everyone wanted to edit the ending. Cale monitored the standoff from the shadows, his hand resting on a weapon he knew was useless here. "This is the volatility you unleashed," he murmured. "Not war over resources, but war over meaning." Elara understood the true test had begun. The archive was not just broadcasting, it was holding up a mirror, and every species saw a different reflection of their deepest fears and needs. She had to become a diplomat for the ineffable. She did not access the terminal to grant or deny requests. Instead, she asked the lumen a question. What is the first thing your children see when their light forms coalesce? The response was a soft, sad blue. They see the great pattern, the mathematical truth of our structure. And do you show it to them? She asked, of course. It is their heritage, Elara nodded, thinking of the book's endless pages. A story is not a lesson to be injected, she offered. It is a door to be opened. Perhaps do not give them a story of discovery. Instead, show them the pattern and then tell them the story of the first lumen who looked at it and wondered, not what it was, but why it was beautiful. You are not giving them a foreign dream. You are reminding them of their own capacity to dream. For the hegemony, her approach was different. She had Cale bring their commander into the archive, not to the central terminal, but to one of the now singing, empty shelves. You hear the transmission as a song, yes, she asked. The Draconid growled an affirmation. It is a weapon of softness. It is true, she conceded. It can soften a hard heart. But can a sword carve a masterpiece? Can a warship nurture a garden? The transmission carries many songs. You hear only the lullabies. There are also sagas of endurance, of protecting home against impossible odds, of sacrifice for the next generation. These are not foreign to you. They are the truth beneath your own epics. To silence the broadcast is to deafen yourselves to the full spectrum of your own strength. Her negotiations were not about granting access, but about guiding perspective. She helped factions see that the book's value was not in its specific stories, but in its function as a tool for self-recognition. The most volatile thing in the universe was not the content of the transmission, but the reaction it provoked, the fear of change, the hunger for a quick fix, the terror of seeing one's own reflection in a stranger's tale. Elara's role became that of an interpreter, standing at the source, using the book's wisdom not to dictate, but to facilitate understanding. She realized the artifact's ultimate purpose was not to provide answers, but to teach the galaxy how to ask better questions of itself. The council chamber was a sphere of cold light and polished data displays, a place designed for the efficient arbitration of fact. Representatives from a dozen major powers flickered as holograms or stood in tense physical silence. The Concord delegate, a being of pure logic housed in a minimalist chassis, presented its case with flawless precision. The organic codex transmission represents an unregulated variable of immense cultural potency. To prevent chaos, its access must be regulated, its narratives curated and distributed through approved channels for optimal societal integration. It is, after all, a resource. Like water, it must be managed to prevent both drought and flood. Elara listened, standing not at a podium, but beside the now quiet terminal, her hand resting lightly on the cool stone of the archive shelf behind her. When the delegate finished, the chamber waited for her rebuttal. She did not offer a counter-proposal. She opened a small, personal data slate where she had transcribed a passage from the book. Her voice, when she spoke, was not that of a diplomat, but of a storyteller. It tells of a walled garden, she began, her words simple and clear, built by a fearful king to protect the rarest flower in the world. He posted guards, devised complex keys, and allowed visitors only under strictest supervision. For a time, the flower was safe, but within a generation, it began to wither. It was not sick, it was lonely. It missed the casual brush of a child's hand, the whispered secret of a lover, the unintended pollen brought by a stray bee from a wild meadow. The king had protected the flower from everything, including the very things that made it want to bloom. She looked up, her gaze sweeping the assembled delegates. A story is not water, it is a seed. It does not flow where you direct it. It chooses its own ground. It lies dormant for seasons until the right mind, in the right moment of quiet or crisis, provides the exact conditions for it to germinate. You cannot issue a story like a ration. You can only offer it like a held-out hand and see if another hand chooses to take it. The silence that followed was different from the cold quiet of logic. It was the silence of a truth being recognized. The Draconid commander gave a slow, solemn nod. The Lumen representative shimmered in a pattern of contemplative silver. Even the Concord delegates' processing lights flickered in a slower, more thoughtful rhythm. The parable of the locked garden did not argue against protection. It argued for a different kind of protection, one based on trust in the process of growth, not control over the product. From this shared understanding, the compact of narrative was born. It was not a treaty governing a resource, but a set of principles governing a sanctuary. The archive and its broadcast would remain neutral, accessible to any mind that sought it, with no central authority dictating which stories were heard or why. The only rule was that of the seed itself, no coercion. Stories could be offered but never forced. They could be interpreted but never censored. The archive's role was not that of a librarian who decides who reads what, but of a gardener who ensures the soil is fertile and the gate is never locked. The compact transformed the white sphere from a secret to a pilgrimage site. Ships from countless worlds now journeyed to the edge of the temporal labyrinth, not to seize but to listen. They dock at the archive and their emissaries walk the singing shelves, not to demand a specific narrative, but to experience the resonance and see what story, if any, chooses to resonate with them. Some leave with a specific feeling, a half-remembered melody that haunts them for years. Others leave with nothing but the quiet certainty of having stood in a place where the universe keeps its most precious dreams. The archive's true power lies in its open door, a silent testament to the radical idea that the most valuable things are not kept safe by being locked away, but by being trusted to find their own way in the world. The archive hums with a sound no longer of machinery, but of a forest breathing. Ilara walks its central corridor, her footsteps silent on the moss-carpeted stone. Where once stretched infinite, empty shelves as a monument to guilt, now rises a living, growing library. The shelves are no longer barren. They are filled not with identical tomes, but with a breathtaking diversity of memory. Here, a lumen crystal pulses gently, containing the light pattern of a newly composed symphony of wonder. There, a Draconid battle standard hangs, its woven threads now imbued with the epic of a protector, not a conqueror. A softly glowing fungal node from the mycelium holds the collective memory of a new harmony, one that includes the sound of human laughter. Thousands of species have come, not to take but to give. They have contributed their own stories, their own truths, adding their unique voices to the chorus that began with a single, solitary whisper. The archive is no longer a transmitter of one signal. It has become a nexus of shared becoming, a place where the galaxy comes to remember itself in all its chaotic, beautiful variety. At the heart of this living library, in a quiet alcove bathed in the soft, dappled light of bioluminescent vines, Ilara finally comes to a stop. In her hands, she holds the original book, the Human Codex. Its leather is worn smooth by her touch, its pages faintly warm as they have always been. This is not a vault nor a terminal. It is a simple pedestal of living wood grown from the archive's own transformed substance. With a reverence that holds the weight of her entire journey from fugitive to curator, she places the book upon it. The moment it settles, the soft, golden glow from its pages, which had pulsed like a heartbeat for so long, steadies into a constant, gentle radiance. It does not go dark, it simply rests. Its frantic work is done. The seed has sprouted, the story has been told, and the song has been sung across the stars. It no longer needs to guide or to fight. Its purpose now is simply to be, to exist as the first note in an endless symphony, the original spark that lit a fire in the galactic dark. Ilara steps back, looking at the artifact that cost her everything and gave the universe something it did not know it lacked. It is not locked away, it is not worshipped. It is present, accessible, a quiet center around which the galaxy's new stories gently orbit. Anyone who walks this corridor can approach it, can feel the warmth from its pages, can sense the ancient foundational resonance within. It is a reminder that from a single, fragile, handwritten narrative, an entire ecosystem of meaning can grow. The most valuable thing in the universe turned out not to be a weapon, a shield, or a key to power. It was an invitation, and now in a library built by countless hands, that invitation glows on, forever open, asking only one question of every visitor who passes by: what story will you bring? The soft moss beneath her feet absorbed the sound of her approach, the living archive breathing its quiet, verdant sigh around her. She stood before the pedestal, the original book's gentle glow painting her face in warm light, a silent communion she performed most days. A heavier, familiar footfall crunched on the path behind her. Cale's shadow fell beside her own, but he wasn't looking at the book. In his hands, he cradled a new artifact, his claws handling it with a delicacy that still seemed at odds with his frame. It was a simple, unfired clay tablet, small enough to fit on a palm, its surface etched with crude, looping symbols. The scent of raw earth and sun-baked dust still clung to it. He didn't speak of security perimeters or diplomatic incidents. He simply held it out. They brought this today from a world on the fringe. No hyperdrive, no networked consciousness. They only just mastered radio. Their envoy said they heard the broadcast as a strange, beautiful static in their upper atmosphere. It gave their best storyteller a dream she couldn't shake. She carved the dream into the clay before the first rains could wash it from her mind. Ilara took the tablet. The symbols were alien, but the feeling emanating from it was unmistakable. A thrilling, vertiginous tale of a creature swimming through the rings of a gas giant, a story of solitude and vast, silent beauty. It was a narrative that had never existed before, born from the collision of a human resonance and an entirely new way of seeing the universe. She ran her fingers over the grooves, feeling the earnest pressure of the artist's tool, the humble permanence of the attempt. Cale watched her, and a low, rough sound escaped him, the closest he ever came to a contented hum. See, it's working. The universe is writing back. The truth of it settled in the air, more profound than any treaty. The value had never been in the original object, not truly. It had been in the conversation it started. The human book was the first sentence spoken into a cosmic silence. For eons, the silence had been absolute. Then came a whisper of story, and now, from 1,000 different throats in 1,000 different mediums, in light, in song, in carved clay, the silence was answering. It was a dialogue spanning time and species, each new story a response to an old one, a question posed to the future. The archive was no longer just a repository or a transmitter. It had become a living record of that conversation, the galaxy's great, ongoing reply to the question of what it means to be alive. The clay tablet resting beside the leather-bound book was not an addition to a collection. It was the next line in a poem that would never end. The archive satellite hung in the void, no longer a silent white sphere but a luminous, slow-turning jewel. From its core, the constant, gentle broadcast pulsed outward, a beacon not of light or sound but of meaning. It was visible only to those who knew how to look, a shimmer in the fabric of space where countless stories crossed paths, a nexus in the dark where the galaxy came to remember itself. On its moss-grown observation deck, Ilara watched the stars not as points of light, but as distant campfires around which other tales were being told. Her journey had begun in fear, clutching a forbidden artifact. It had led her here to a quiet center where she was no longer a protector, but a witness to a miracle she helped begin. A soft chime echoed through the living corridors, signaling the arrival of another pilgrim vessel, carrying its own piece of the ever-growing story. She smiled, a private, peaceful expression, and spoke her final thoughts aloud, her voice a quiet thread woven into the archive's eternal hum. They called it a book, it was a key, they called it valuable, it was vital. The most valuable thing in the universe was never a thing at all. It was the connection it forged, the story shared, the memory returned. And that is a story that never ends. As her words faded, the camera began to pull back, slowly, steadily. It drifted away from her solitary figure, past the thriving, verdant shelves now holding the clay tablets and light crystals of 1,000 species, through the shimmering energy field that was the broadcast itself. The archive satellite shrank to a single, brilliant point of golden warmth against the infinite black. And then, as the view expanded to encompass the swirling arm of the galaxy, that single point was joined by others, faint, distant echoes of the same resonance, sparks of narrative kindling in the dark on worlds the archive had never touched, stories passing from mind to mind in an endless whispering chain. The connection was made, the conversation had begun, and somewhere in the quiet of a new world under unfamiliar stars, another being paused, felt a strange and beautiful echo in their soul, and began haltingly to tell their own story for the very first time.